We are back now with a very special guest. He's an NFL draft, fantasy football, and college football analyst, and you can catch him on the Draft Countdown podcast. It is Shane P. Hallam. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's draft season is upon us, right? Everyone's turned their attention to it. So this is the last month I revel in. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. We're getting closer and closer to April, which just basically means closer and closer to the NFL draft at the end of the month, and that's what we're super excited about. So, without further ado, I'll send it to my co-host Alex to get us going.
So you had the most recent mock draft. I looked, you did a 7-round mock draft recently. So I'm not going to go all the way through the 7 rounds, but I want to kind of go through the first 3 rounds and see what you're thinking for the Giants. So you had Ike Ekwonu at 5, Sauce Gardner at 7, at 5 and 7 for those 2 first-round picks for the Giants. Do you see any other options possibly at that pick? What made you select those 2 guys for the Giants?
I think the Giants do have some options. I think for me, seeing Ekwonu there, who some teams have rated as the top offensive tackle on the board. So I think if he's sitting there 5, it's a tough pass for them. I know they like Charles Cross out of Mississippi State. And so depending on how things fall, maybe they wait and hope they can get him a pick later, or maybe these kind of swap and they try to get Cross at 7. But I think Ekwonu just fits some of that mentality of being this brutal, run blocker who can play tackle, who can kick inside to guard, but has really good athletic ability. And that's why he's a top 5 pick in this draft. Something I did not see before this season, but really saw this season was him be a good blindside protector. I think those offensive tackles are in play. Evan Neal from Alabama, Cross from and Ekwonu. So I think offensive tackle, I feel like one of those spots, 5 or 7, like offensive tackle feels good. I think the other one is open. Sauce Gardner is a pretty common pick there just because Sauce Gardner, I think, is a top 8 pick in this draft. Like, I feel like he is. And so when you start getting into, okay, what teams are going to take him that have a need, that have that, it's like the Giants kind of fit the bill a little bit with some of the, past failures of first round picks at corner and Baker and those kind of things. But I think edge rusher is definitely in play. I think if Trayvon Walker from Georgia falls, I think he's a very fine possibility. If they like Kevon Thibodeaux out of Oregon more than it seems like some of these top teams do, I think he's in play there at 5 or 7. But you guys can correct me too, but I feel like those 3 positions, defensive back, offensive tackle, edge, feel pretty good. Maybe Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame's an option, but it seems like their moves this offseason probably preclude that. I think they'd rather the corner. But that's usually my thought process looking at these 2 Giants first round picks.
Yeah, and you mentioned the cornerback position for the Giants. There are a few Giants fans around Twitter who are not liking cornerbacks to be on that list. We have James Bradberry, we have Adoree Jackson, and after that, you would probably say Aaron Robinson, the draft pick from last season. The thing is, though, we don't know. We aren't fully certain of James Bradberry's future with the New York Giants if he gets shopped around to other teams, which would then leave that number 1 cornerback slot kind of open where, you would think Adoree Jackson takes that, but having someone like Gardner come in there and, take that spot is a big need. And I think Gardner, he has a really great ability. And we actually just recently ranked our top cornerbacks in this NFL draft. So it's funny that you have that there. What do you think of someone like McCreary in the 2nd round, maybe even falling to that 36 spot? Could he fill that void there?
I think it's a possibility. I think if they don't go corner round 1, there are a lot of those good kind of slot type corners. Roger McCreary at Auburn's interesting to me because you put on Auburn games against SEC competition and he flashes. I mean, this guy looks like a legitimate NFL cornerback, has that athleticism. He can be a little bit tough at the line of scrimmage, but generally they played him off the ball with a little bit of deep zone, sometimes in the cover 3. So he's running man up with Jameson Williams. He's running man up with some of these SEC receivers and held his own really, really well. A lot of teams threw away from him, just didn't want to deal with him. I think the problem with Roger McCreary comes in with his arms are short, and he doesn't quite have that build that you want in an ideal number one corner. So I could see some teams, I think it depends on the scheme. I think some teams are going to say Roger McCreary is going to be a top-notch nickel corner. We've seen nickel corners go high round 2. I think he's still in play at that point, but there might be teams that say, well, this isn't the guy. So like you said, if they go with Jackson and Bradbury and feel like, they want Bradbury to stay and play the boundary for whatever reason, then I think McCreary could be in play. And I think there's a lot of good corners, even in round 3, that have maybe a little more of that press ability if that's what they want to do. For me, I always worry about when you have a team that has a new general manager and new coach, head to coach, what happens with some of those guys that are already on the roster? Like if there's rumors of them shopping James Bradbury, they probably don't think he's a starter, right? You're not going to be shopping him too much if you're like, this is a long-term starter for us. So I think 36 could be a spot if they pass on Sauce Gardner to take someone, whether it be like you said, a McCreary or a Kyler Gordon from Washington, or maybe an Andrew Booth falls from Clemson.
Yeah, so in your mock draft at 36, you had Trey McBride from Colorado State. Many see him as the number 1 tight end in this class. I've seen certain mocks that he's going as early as round 2, where you have him here, sometimes late round 2, early round 3. What do you think about this tight end class? Do you think McBride, I assume he's your number 1, and also, lots of people are talking about this is a really deep tight end class. This is a class that is not exactly top heavy, but has a lot of depth going into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round and onwards.
I think for me, the tight end class is probably the most difficult to wrap my head around in terms of this draft, because we don't have that first round guy. Do I think Trey McBride could go in the late first? I wouldn't say no. I think there are teams that could like him, but he doesn't have that athletic profile that you typically look for in a first round pick. So that's why I kind of feel like early second is a nice spot for him. And the Giants obviously having a big need at the tight end position with Evan Ingram, gone. I honestly think it's a deep tight end class, but with a kind of a big button there. But I don't think a lot of these guys are true number 1 tight ends. I think when we say it's a deep class, I see a lot of guys that are going to be really good, rock solid number 2 tight ends on the team. They're going to block. They're going to catch a couple touchdowns. They're going to break some fantasy players' hearts when they steal a touchdown from a running back, those kind of things. But if we look at kind of the requisite athleticism for a George Kittle, for Travis Kelce, who's that day 2 tight end that's going to turn into that? There's a couple, but no one that I think both has that ability and flashed enough in college consistency to make you feel like you have a number 1 tight end. It would not overly surprise me if we look back on this tight end class and say, man, this really stunk. Like, this tight end class wasn't good, even if a lot of them stick around the NFL, but no one like shined, right? You usually need a couple guys to kind of come out of the woodwork. So like Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina, really good receiver, had a great career. Then he ran a 4.8, and now like you got to run a 4.75 if you want to be, a dominant number 1 tight end. And he's small; it's just not going to happen. So then you're taking swings on, McBride or Greg Dulcich from UCLA, who, I think both of those guys on film look really good, but also probably don't have that requisite athletic ability to maybe be dominant in those one-on-one battles. And the guys that do, Jelani Woods from Virginia, Charlie Kohler from Iowa State, Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State, weren't used in that way for most of their college career. They weren't big-time receivers. So what do? I think that's the problem with this tight end class. It's hard, I think these coaches are going to see some of these players and say, I can fix him. I can turn him into that. Like Trey McBride, he is so good in his body control and making contested catches and doing a little bit after the catch. I think there's going to be coaches that say, I can make him a star if he just, learns a little bit more, and we can put him in kind of that Jason Witten role, stick route, let him do what he does well. So I think a team will take him early, but I think he's going to be limited. And I think all these tight ends will be limited in the NFL.
I have a follow-up question about the tight end class heading into this NFL draft. When I was looking at rankings in like playoff time, January, February, towards the Super Bowl, I was seeing Jalen Watermeyer as one of like the top guys on these lists. Now, maybe I was looking at the wrong tight end rankings, and maybe you can clarify that for me. But why is it that when I'm looking now, Weidermeyer has been dropping further and further into lists? Is there something I'm missing as a fan or as a viewer? Has he been getting worse?
He ran really slow at his pro day, didn't he? I remember that. It was like a 5 something.
5:03. Look, this is no, it's fair. This is probably one of my biggest misses pre-draft to now. I'm gonna have an article coming out on Sunday about Jalen Weidermeyer and the curious case that he is, because I watched him as a freshman coming into Texas A&M to SEC and absolutely dominate Alabama defenders. Like, I mean, this guy looked like a stud, and I preached that all college season. It wasn't as good this year, but I think it's one of my biases. I was like, I saw him be so good at like 18 years old in the SEC. He can't be that bad. And then, people aren't talking about him. He's dropping down lists. And then the workout was one of the worst workouts we've ever had for a tight end. We're talking bottom 10% ever of tight ends. There's been a handful, like we're talking 4 or 5 players with his athletic profile that even got drafted, and that's 6th, 7th rounders, and 90% of them did not, right? And didn't make a team. So it's like, what do you do? I saw this guy play really well. There's some questions about effort and some of the character concerns. There's some character concerns there. Like maybe that's more the issue, and maybe someone can fix that. Probably not. So he's gone from my number 1 tight end for a long time down to number 11, and it sucks. And like, it's like I screwed up. Somehow I didn't understand that he was that slow, or I don't know, but something's wrong there.
And so the Giants, I want to go down to your 81st overall pick for the Giants. You had James Cook. Obviously, there's been tons of rumors that the Giants love James Cook. Obviously, lots of Giants scouts, lots of Giants coaches at his pro day. Everyone looking at him. Apparently, rumors that they're very interested in him.
Just remember, Alex, today, Ian Rappaport reported that 4 Giant scouts are watching Sam Howell at his pro day too. One of them was Bobby Johnson, the O-line coach. So who knows how much that makes sense. But
I think I saw Art Stapleton made a tweet about that, saying that, NC State, it's right next door, obviously, to UNC. So they're probably just all waiting for Ike Ekwonu's pro day, which I believe is tomorrow. So we'll see how he does. But yeah, James Cook is someone who I kind of find interesting. He doesn't really pop off to me on tape. Obviously he has the good genes with being Dalvin Cook's brother, but what exactly do you see in him for, to pick him for the Giants? What do you think the Giants see in him in terms of the running back position?
Yeah, and I'll say too, like North Carolina has a couple offensive linemen worth drafting on day 3. So, you might be able to sneak those in there. But James Cook, I think when you start to see those links, and especially when I get into round 3, round 4, like, if there's a link to a player, it's an easy kind of fit. I do think running back itself probably is more of a focus for the Giants than people want to think. Obviously, they've talked about, if the right offer comes along, they'll trade Saquon Barkley. It's probably not going to happen, right? But, that line of thinking says, like, Matt Breida is not going to be your answer if that happens or in a year. So getting a guy like James Cook, who I agree with you, doesn't necessarily pop on film. And that's kind of the Georgia way. The Georgia Bulldogs have notoriously just split that running back role so many different ways. They bring 5-star, high 4-star guys in all the time. And it's why Nick Chubb fell to the 2nd round of the NFL draft, because you just didn't get to see him showcased enough, plus the injuries. I think Cook is one of those players who is an elite pass catching running back. They started to put him out wide a little bit this season when, without George Pickens, when they had some other receiver injuries, and he basically flashed as a receiver too. So I think in terms of a versatile weapon, you have Kadarius Toney last year. Once again, new regime here. You can get a player that's kind of, I would say harking back to the Bills, like Devin Singletary plus, it's Devin Singletary with actual speed. And I think that could be really intriguing in the long term, and someone in the short term that even with Saquon Barkley can give him a breather, can catch passes out of the backfield, isn't a negative pass blocker, has a lot of those little things. So like I have James Cook further down my rankings because of what you said. I think he's more a roll back. He's my RB8, but I do think NFL teams are going to like him a lot more. And, running backs can be a dime a dozen, and they can get a player like that to come in and play that role. And who knows, he has the athletic ability. He has decent enough size. He could be a lead back in the future.
Another player that I really like at the running back position, obviously had a terrible combine, Kyron Williams. He's an interesting one. I think on tape, he seems quicker than what he ran. I believe he ran in the high 4.6s or low 4.7s. But what do you think about him? I actually really like him. I thought he stood out on tape to me as kind of a pass catcher out of the backfield, kind of do it all. And he plays faster to me than what he did at the combine.
I think Kyron Williams is not, dead in the water at this point. His pro day was good. Like, he had the 6.94 3-cone, which is really good. And his shuttle was very good as well at 4.19. And like you say, he has that quickness. He has that short area quickness. That's what those drills are testing. He may not be the player that can run, a 4.4. I think he improved his time in his pro in the mid 4.5s, but it's Notre Dame. I expect that to happen a little bit. I think on day 3, he is definitely worth a pick. I'm releasing player comps on Draft Countdown. I compared him to Dion Lewis, prospect out of Pittsburgh a few years ago. What's like a day 3 pick who had a lot of success just being smaller and quick. He didn't have to be fast because when you can make guys miss in that short space, which I think Kyron Williams showed time and time again that he could do, you can find a role in the NFL. And I think he's tough enough too that he'll do it. But it's going to be one of those things like, what do teams say when a guy runs a 4.65, is under 200 pounds? Like, and this is a deep class all around for every position. Are you really going to spend a decent premium pick on him? I think when you get into round 5, round 6, if he's sitting there, I think it'd be a tough pass.
Speaking of the Draft Countdown, the website, on the big board, the number 1 guy, Kevon Thibodeaux. Can you speak a little bit about him and just why he's number 1 on that list?
I will, because he's not number 1 on seemingly any NFL team lists. So I'll we still are standing strong there. I just think from day 1 of his college career, Kevon Thibodeaux was the best player on the field for Oregon. And that explosive first step to get to the passer is just so exceptional. Is one of the best that I've seen. Now, he doesn't compare to some of the other high-end pass rushers recently, Chase Young, the Bosas. I think because Kevon Thibodeaux doesn't play the run as well as those players. He doesn't set the edge like that. But there are a ton of plays from this year when he was playing a little banged up and was in and out that, just exceptionally gets off the line of scrimmage to the end of the backfield and changes the play. Maybe he doesn't get a sack or doesn't get a tackle for loss. That's not on the stat sheet. I think that's what he brings to the table. And the league is built on getting to the quarterback. And I'm not sure that anyone can do it as well as him at this point. So I'm still on it. Maybe falls to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. That's fine. I'll take my chances. I do think he's a little more raw than an elite edge prospect. I don't really have an elite grade on any player in this class. So that makes things a little bit different ultimately. But I still think he's really good, and teams should be considering him in the top 5.
Yeah, if he falls to 5 or 7, I have no problem with that. So it's all good. Have him keep falling on draft boards. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. I think if I was the Giants, if it was me drafting and he's there at 5, I would leap at the opportunity to grab him and grab my offensive tackle at 7. I'd be happy with that.
Speaking of edge rushers, obviously someone who's really risen up boards after the combine, Trayvon Walker. What are your thoughts on him? Do you see him as a top 5, top 10 talent, or are you kind of not buying into the hype post combine? I'm not really someone who looks at the combine and is like, wow, he did that at the combine. He's now a top 5 pick for me. I think Trayvon Walker I still liked him before the combine, but I think some of the hype he's getting is a little bit too much. What do you think about that?
I have Walker as my 6th player on the board. And I think not just the combine, but what he put together from the college football playoff through that point. The national championship, he was arguably the best defender on the field for Georgia, which we know are going to have a ton of 1st, 2nd, 3rd round picks. He made the difference in that game, getting to the passer. I just think he's a lot more raw than Thibodeaux or Aiden Hutchinson. I think Trayvon Walker has some problems with his leverage. I think he plays a little bit high. He relies on that athleticism a little bit too much, doesn't have a ton of moves. Like he's this kind of lump of clay that if you can mold into what you want, then you can teach some of those teachable skills. He could be top 5 pass rusher in the NFL. I think that's what teams see. And like I said before, I think NFL coaches think they can fix a player. They think they can make them, you don't become an NFL head coach or offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, or D-line coach and think, wow, I'm pretty crappy at this job, right? Like, you don't think that. You're going to go in and say, this guy has all the skills. I can teach him how to have more pass rush moves. I can teach him how to play low, and he's going to be a monster. So that's why he's going to get drafted high, why he's probably in consideration for the number 1 overall pick. And I think probably going to go in the top 3.
Yeah, I was about to say that. I think he's probably going to go top 3, top 4. I don't think he gets past the Jets. But definitely, he's also versatile. So that's something that is also definitely coveted by a lot of NFL teams. For me, my number 1 player in this class is Kyle Hamilton. I think he is a stud. I love, watching him at Notre Dame. What do you think about him? Where do you think his ceiling is? Where do you think his floor is? And what kind of speak to the positional value argument that a lot of people are making about why Kyle Hamilton can't go super early. Obviously, safety has not always been one of the most coveted positions, but obviously safety is becoming more and more important in the modern day NFL as QBs like Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes are slinging the ball downfield.
I think that's what makes it tough. Like if someone has Kyle Hamilton, you have Kyle Hamilton number 1. I can't argue with you. I think in terms of as a playmaker, you can make that argument because I think he is really good, and that size and athleticism and speed is off the charts. I think the position of safety is growing in importance, but I also think a lot of teams are recognizing we don't need an elite safety, right? We need someone that can play deep. And if you have a Kyle Hamilton, like you don't just want to do a 2 deep shell. Like that's just wasting his talents and wasting a top 5 pick. You want someone that can kind of Troy Polamalu, Sean Taylor it, and play around the line of scrimmage, can back up, can move around the field, use that athleticism, use that size in the run game, do a little bit of everything. And so I think there's certain schemes where they're gonna say he's great, but like we don't need that. We don't need him to have an effective defense. And that's what hurts. I think his ceiling, I think he could go 2. I think in my mock I had him going 2 to the Lions. I think it's possible. I think he could fall outside the top 10. I don't think it's out of the question. I would doubt it. I think someone's going to take an elite talent like that, a top end talent like that, maybe just on the edge of being like, one of my higher rated safeties ever. He's just a safety. I think that's what the difference is.
You can go check out all the coverage and draft content on the Draft Countdown website, and check out the podcast, the Draft Countdown podcast. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shane P. Hallam. Thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.